Okay, so welcome to series 0 of the beginner series. It's kind of like a preface video. In this video we are just going to kind of go over some things that you need to know as a beginner in Blender. So yeah, let's go ahead and open up Blender. Alright, cool. So here we are in Blender. If this is the first time you are opening Blender, it may be overwhelming, but we do know one thing for sure. We want to start a 2D animation. So we'll go ahead and click 2D animation, and here we are. Do not get too nervous. All of these things I'm going to do without a drawing tablet. I will eventually do a drawing tablet and show you how to use that version as well, so you are comfortable in both aspects. So we'll just kind of quickly go over what everything is, how to identify things, and so that you feel really confident in the program. So yeah, here we are. So here we are on the left. This is the draw. This is your base thing. If you want to draw, this is the tool that you select. You can do Control Z. I'm going to go ahead and turn input history on so you can kind of see what I'm doing. But you'll draw, then hit Control Z, and then that just undoes any work that you do. That's the main hotkey that we're going to care about. Control S we'll hit, and this will allow us to save, and you can save it as whatever you want. So I'll do 00 intro. You can't see this, but trust me, you're saving stuff. So make sure to save often. That is the first tip, is to save often. Moving down the toolbar is going to be the fill tool. So the fill tool is used just like any other paint program. Whenever we draw something, we'll select the fill tool, and then we'll hit fill, and it'll fill the inside of our selected area. You can kind of barely see it because it's kind of a bad example here. Alright, make sure when you do use the fill tool that you select the right material. So we'll do a solid fill, and then we'll hit the fill tool, and it'll fill it using that material. We'll get into materials later, but for right now, just know this is the material pane, and materials act like the color, the reference that we use for our color palette. So if you think of a color palette and there's all these different types of materials, think of or types of paint, think of the materials palette panel as that. It's going to have different strokes, and we'll think of the stroke materials as pens, and then the fills as just the paint itself, and then you can mix both of those and create something just like a normal picture. So yeah, so we'll do Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, and now we'll refresh again. So moving down, we have the erase tool. Super self-explanatory, but if you don't know, we will kind of go into it. So the erase tool, if we come right here to this toolbar, we can change the radius, and this will affect how it erases. This looks like a standard erase. Whenever we go ahead and erase a stroke, we can change the type to point. So we do go ahead and do it, and it'll erase each point. Understand that the way Blender operates is by points, similar to SVG. And if you don't know what a SVG is, it stands for Scalable Vector Graphic, and all that is a series of mathematical points represented by an image. So you see an image, but you can move and it can scale without having lossless, without stretching out and having things that a JPEG or a PNG would suffer from. It's a little technical, so I'll try not to get too much into it, but just know that if you come over here to edit mode, we'll come over here to select mode and the points, and this is what I'm talking about. Everything is represented by points and space. They have an X and Y, and in Blender's case a Z value as well, and you can edit them. So when we come back to draw mode, we hit the eraser here, and since we're on points, we are just erasing those points that are in our little circle. Cool, so we can switch here to stroke, and we hit stroke, it erases the whole stroke. Pretty self-explanatory, but we'll go on and draw really quick. We'll draw multiple strokes so you can kind of get a better visualization. We'll come back in here to stroke, and as you can see, I am erasing only the stroke. And if you're wondering how I'm resizing the brush, we'll push F. F is a useful key, hotkey in 2D animation in Blender. It changes the brush size. Shift space is how we change between draw, fill, erase, tint, cutter, eyedropper, line, polytool, arc, curve, interpolate, circle, and annotate. So we can use that to quickly draw something, shift space, and then we can jump in to erase as well. So Moving back, let me just go back really quick to draw. I forgot to kind of show you this. Draw, this is how you change the radius, or you can hold F to change the radius. Go in and go out, and now you can change the radius. Now, this right here stands for pressure sensitivity. And you can actually hover over things and they tell you everything, but basically what the pressure sensitivity allows us to do is if we're using a pen, we can kind of go inside the drawing tablet using the pressure, and we can do things like when we draw the stroke, it wouldn't be straight like this, it will taper off. And what I mean by that is kind of hard to show you, but it uses how hard you press to determine the size of it. So moving on, we can turn this off. I would say generally speaking, we want to have it off and just turned off, so that everything is kind of the same. So then come over here, we have the strength, and the strength represents how dark it is drawn. So what I usually have is, by default, I have strength to 100%, and right here we turn off the pressure sensitivity because for this series of videos we are only going to use the mouse, and all of this doesn't really matter when you're only using the mouse. Right here we have the cap on it, the cap type. So by default it's a rounded cap. This is what it means by cap right here on the end, rounded. This is a square cap. See how you see at the end, it's more like one of those angled pens or angled markers. Control Z, Control Z. The advanced stuff we won't really get into too much, but just know that at a later video we will revisit this. Usually I'll kind of go over some main ones that you would use, which is going to be the hardness, and the hardness is just basically the blurriness of it. So if we kind of turn it down, and that makes it a really soft stroke compared to when it's at 100%. As you can see, it's a very hard stroke. So we'll just keep it at 100 for now. And then we also have the stroke, post-processing, and smoothness. This is just more advanced things, just something to consider if you really care about the individual parts of the post-processing when you are drawing a stroke. But overall, for this series, we won't dive into it too much. Maybe the intermediate or advanced. So moving on, we'll go down and we'll draw a stroke, and we'll go over tint. So tint is very simple, very self-explanatory. We can change the tint of the stroke by coming over here to the color, change the color, and there you go. Hold F, we can now change the tint. So this is really useful if you just want to quickly change the color of a stroke and don't want to have to keep creating new materials. We can change the radius just like the others, the strength, and that's about it. We can also specify if we want it on just the stroke, the fill, or the stroke and the fill. So yeah, moving on, we have the cutter. The cutter is also kind of, I hate to keep saying self-explanatory, but it acts as a knife with the points. So you could stay in the draw mode and cut points apart, or you can switch to edit mode and then select the points right here and delete them points manually, whichever you like. There's 1,000 ways to do things. Moving on, we have the eyedropper tool. So we draw a line. When we set the eyedropper tool, and all this does is allow us to find the color that we are creating. So we hit the eyedropper tool and it says, hey, you're using this material. We can kind of prove this by going over here and selecting a different material using the eyedropper tool. We'll select it and it will actually create us a new material, which is very interesting. I didn't know that the eyedropper tool does it. Honestly, we won't really use it, so just know that this, if you have material selected and hit this, it will create a new material based off of this, if it's a color that has not already been defined. Come over here, we can select palette and we can select these, and it should add to our palette, which we won't get into. Let's just say that, not in this video. So moving forward, we have the line tool, and in the line tool, what we want to do is, all we'll do is we'll go in here to the materials, select a material, which is solid stroke, and we'll drag it across, and it creates a nice line for us. The cool thing to note about this, we can change the materials right here on the top. We can change the I believe material color, paint mode, vertex color. So if we're using vertex colors, we'll do that. But the big one that we care about is actually these subdivisions. What this means is if you draw a line, this is how many times it will be subdivided when you draw it. So we'll draw 6. And then we'll switch to edit mode. You can do tab or do the drop down right here. And now when we drag over these, you see that right here there is 2 points in between the first point and the second point. It has been subdivided twice. This one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 subdivisions, so it has been subdivided 6 times. Why this matters is because the more simple the points, the sharper the curves are going to be. So we have less control over everything. However, it's a lot simpler, so there's less error. There's less margin for error. So ideally you want to have really nice, pretty points. So if we come over here and we do smooth, we can kind of smooth out these points like this, and you see how it's more like a curve. When we try to smooth this out, it's a lot more jagged. But once again, you're gonna have to pay the cost of performance by adding more points. So just keep that in mind. It adds complexity when we do this. So what we can do is come back into draw mode, then we'll do shift space erase, have point selected, which I usually stay in always, and then we'll start with a fresh one. So right here we have polyline, and this is basically just a cool way to quickly create a polygon or multi-sided shape. And then we'll push enter, and when we push enter, it completes our drawing process. Just like the line, you can change the material, the type right here that you use, the subdivisions, the radius, the strength as well. So yeah, the arc is similar to the polyline and the line. You just grab this middle thing right here and you will adjust the arc, hit enter, and there you go. This right here is the curve line, similar to the line, but it has 2 handles right here. So it creates a nice clean curve. The box creates a box, as you may think. Circle creates a circle. This actually is now modern art. So yeah. And the last one is interpolate. Now this one we don't really have an example to show. I am not too sure about this. We don't actually use this. There's a drop down that we use for interpolate, so ignore that. And annotate's pretty self-explanatory as well, kind of, not really. So annotate is just so if you want to make notes like Blender is cool. So we use that to make the some notes. We can stabilize strokes right here. So we hold this down, and then it creates a little stabilization for us. So we can change the factor, the radius as well, and then there you go. Moving back to the draw mode, when we come to give me 1 second. Okay, and if you want to erase the annotation, we'll come down here, we click and hold, and we go to annotate erase, and as you can see, we are now erasing the annotations. We can click and hold. There is annotate polygon, which I forgot to go over, which is the same thing. Push enter to apply. Then we do annotate line, just the line, hit enter. Then we do the drop down again, annotate erase, and we go ahead and erase it. So yeah, that is how we go ahead and delete those things. Yeah. So moving forward, now that we have that and we feel relatively comfortable just with the main tools, these tools can sometimes accidentally go away. I know, it's crazy. So if we push T, look, it just disappeared. So to get it back, push T, and there you go, your toolbar is back. Another thing that I would say are common mistakes are if you are in object mode right here and you accidentally hit H. Now everything has disappeared. H means hide, so this happens a lot. You can come up here to the top and you see this eye right here. You can hit it and unselect it. Alternatively, you can do Alt H and it will now show you the stroke or whatever object you had hit it. So that is one thing that really got me messed up, was that in the beginning. I'm trying to think of some other mistakes. If I think of anything, I will let you know. Yeah, so anytime we are working here, stay on the default view. I would say if you ever lose your view, like if you accidentally delete this view, for instance, if I go delete and now you're like, oh my gosh, where did everything go? Where did my timeline is right here, but where did everything go, right? We'll come over here to the add workspace, 2D animation, 2D animation. So we're back to the default view. If you ever delete it, just know that you can always do this plus icon right here and bring it back. So don't be so afraid. Alright, now we'll come over here to the side and I'll kind of quickly go over this. I'll try not to spend too much time in this, but I think it is important for you to understand what each side is. So right here was the tools panel, but you can only see it when you're in draw mode. The tools panel will change when you change modes. When you're animating, you're going to switch. Your main modes are going to be object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, and draw mode. Weight paint and vertex paint are different and they'll come in later when you use bones and stuff like that. So the reason that you'll stay in object mode is if you have multiple strokes, we'll do control, we'll go ahead and select this, we'll do Shift D, so look, now we have multiple strokes. So if I want to select each stroke in Blender is considered an object, and these objects have different properties that you assign to them. So if I want to change, if I have this stroke selected and I'm in object mode, come over here to draw mode, and I was like, hey, I really want to erase this stroke. See, I can't erase it because it's not selected. It will only activate on, it will only edit the active object. So we come over here to object mode, select this right here, this stroke, then we'll come into erase, and there we go. So now we erase. So that's object mode. Object mode comes with multiple ways to select multiple objects. We have the selection box where we pull this out and it will select all the objects in a box. Then we have the circle, which selects in this circle right here. We can change this. I believe that's how that works, actually. I'm not too sure. I never use it. Then we have the lasso, which is really powerful, so we'll use that a lot. We have the 3D cursor. In 2D Blender, you can't see it. Something to note is that you're working in 3D. So if you hold the middle mouse button, you can kind of move around here and see that we are in 3D. If at any time you get lost or you get stuck in this and you're like, hey, how do I come back to the normal view? You will push 0 and now you're in camera view, and this is only what the camera sees when you do your final animation. So staying organized and focused, because I didn't write a script, we can move forward and go down the list. So we can do scale, and we can actually select this, and these little this gizmo right here will pop up, allowing us to scale along the X, Y, and Z axes. So yeah, and then the transform, annotate, eraser, measure, and add cube, all these things we're not going to work with. I don't want to overwhelm you too much. The edit mode we will work in a lot. We'll come up here to the top and we'll switch between the select mode with the points, and this allows us to select individual points. G is to grab. That's how we're going to move things. You can hold G and then X will lock it on that individual axis. We can do G and Y, it'll lock it on that axis. G, Z, lock it on that axis. We can do R to rotate. R is going to rotate R, and the respective axis will lock it on that rotation, make it more precise. Alright, and then also in edit mode we will do this a lot, where we select individual strokes. So we are just changing the size and editing these individual strokes. There we go. Then we can also do the select mode, select points between strokes. So this is only the current stroke selected. Actually, I have no idea what the difference between this is and this first one is, but we can actually do curve editing, which is really powerful, where you select the points and then these little bezier curves come out right here, and we push G to move it around and kind of edit our object. Cool, looks really good. So moving forward, we can actually add different resolutions. The higher, the more complicated, the harder it's going to hurt your computer. But you can stay safe and just change the value to 32 and it'll do the job just fine. Moving on, we will come over here. All of these things we are not really going to get into too much, but just know they are there, like the transform, and you can actually kind of see SR. Tells you the little shortcuts on the side so that it is very useful, and the mirror tool, which is useful if you want to mirror this. However, we are not going to get into that because that is too much for you to worry about. So yeah, moving on, we are going to go down here, and the extrude is just going to extrude the point in one way or the other. You can also push E to extrude, but we're not going to really ever worry with that. We can uncheck that bezier curve so we can just edit it normally. We have radius, which is going to increase the radius of that point, and I highly recommend you do this in stroke mode because that makes more sense. And we can change the thickness like that. The bend is just going to bend the object. The stroke shear is just going to shear it left or right. You can kind of see that it adds kind of a false perspective. Transform fill. Goodness, I am about to run out of talking. So yeah, then all of these things we're not going to worry about. Now we're going to switch over here to sculpt mode. Now what sculpt mode will allow us to do is, first let's do, we'll go into draw. We do shift space, get the eraser, and we'll go ahead and erase this to clean this up. We'll hit tab, then we'll go over here to object mode, select this object, come over here, and we will delete. And now that we just have this one object selected, we will come back in here to sculpt mode. And what sculpt mode allows us to do is similarly to similarly to the draw mode, where you do similarly, I can't even say it. Like draw mode, if we do shift space, we can change in between the modes. You can also come over here and do edit, shift space, and change between those tools. So going into sculpt mode, we want to shift space, and we want to select smooth. Smooth is the first option you get, and we're going to actually smooth out the strokes. And as you can see, that was a square and it's turning into a circle. This allows us to do cool things, like we come over here and we modify this a bit. So if we kind of look at the animation, we can kind of slowly animate without having to redraw everything. So that's pretty cool. So smooth does what it says. Thickness is going to modify the thickness right here, so we can actually kind of give it a more tapered look, make it look like, oh wow, it's thick on one side, and we can kind of change this from positive to negative. So negative will make it smaller, and as you can see, it looks like it's tapering off. This is what I was talking about with your pressure. If you just have a pressure pen, you can do this by drawing. Then we can come down here to the strength. Now the strength is awesome because what does it do? We don't know. Applies tweaks to strokes by painting over strokes. Cool, don't know what it does. Alright, but I do know what randomize does. It just adds noise to your stroke. It looks really cool if you're trying to just quickly make things look chaotic. So it's like, wow. So me before editing, me after. So there you go. Now we're going down. We can do grab, and this is just gonna, we hold F to make it larger. We can move things quickly like this. So there you go. So it can kind of have like an explosion or something. There you go. Now we can come down and do push, which will do the inverse. And awesome. Now this is like a little vortex thing. It'll use some cool little math or something to vortex the points. Moving forward, this will pinch, so we're gonna bring everything in like that. This is super destructive, so make sure that you copy some strokes. Okay, now clone just copies things, and the way to do this, we can kind of come into edit mode, select a stroke, make sure this is selected, do Control C or Command C if you're on a Mac, come into draw, come into sculpt mode, clone, and we can kind of take the things that we copied and paste them all over, similar to a stamp tool. And there we go. We have went over the different main modes that you will deal with in the beginner series, which we won't go over sculpting. So yeah, let's kind of come over here now to this side of the panel on the right. And basically what this is over here is this is going to be your active tool area. I don't know the actual name of it, but this is what is this called? If somebody know, oh, the properties data pane or something, I don't know. We use it all the time. So the first one is if we're in draw mode, and we can come over here to draw, and we can actually, with the pencil selected, we can change the type that we are drawing in. So this will give us a more cartoony like draw, as you can see with a different brush. We can come over here to the pen. This will give us a more pen type. This will pencil. You see how it's like they have the presets, and you can also download more, which I believe that is in a different video where I say quick tips and some things that you should download. Also, we can come in here, mess with the brush settings, make it to where it let me give you an example. So we'll come over here and we'll edit the brush pen taper settings, and so now it will do cool effects like this. If we raise it up, it will do this. And yeah, this is with the radius. So yeah, we can come down here, mess with the advanced stuff. We're not going to get into that. Stroke, post-processing, pretty much everything that I went over. This is going to be your palette right here. You won't deal with the palette unless you do vertex painting. Then the vertex painting opens up the palette. It's kind of weird in that sense. So if you want a palette, you're going to typically use the material pane, which we will get into right now or shortly. So the main default rendering engine, this is going to be the render properties screen, is going to be Eevee. Don't really worry about this, but the sampling 64 is enough, 16 is enough. The higher the number, the more times it does, I guess, sampling. Basically, if it's like a really high number, it's gonna theoretically output a higher quality picture, if I'm not mistaken. All this stuff is really irrelevant to you because you're just working in 2D. Now if you work in 3D, you're going to worry about bloom, ambient occlusion, and things like that. Moving forward, the output, this thing is, you will deal with this, and this is going to be the resolution. We can actually change the resolution to a 1:1 1080 by 1080, which this is now a Instagram square, right? So when we change it, you will notice that it updates live, and that's because we're in camera view. So if we rotate, hit 0, we're in camera view. 1 on the numpad, 2 or 3 is right view, 6 is left, I think 7's top, and yeah, just the different things on the number pad are different views. And right here you can specify the frame rate. So 30 is usually what I work in, but you can do 24, or if you want to do something custom that's not listed here, you'll do custom, and then you'll do 8, and the timeline will reflect this as well. So moving down, we can do a frame start, frame end. So right now our frame ends at 32, so at frame end we'll do 32. And you can see it updates right there on the timeline. So if we push play, it ends right there on 32. Or we can do it in the timeline right here and do 250, and you can see it updates, and right here this updates. But we'll keep it on 32. So moving down, there's more advanced things like 3D, audio, things like this. You probably won't work with this. And then your output, this is a folder that you're going to push, and you can actually output whether you want it to be a PNG, or if you don't know how to deal with that, you can just do an AVI JPEG, which will allow you to just render a normal video format that Windows supports, or an FFmpeg, which is already made for you. So yeah, but if you know how to edit PNG, the best quality is going to be PNG or JPEG outputting. PNG with the RGBA will allow alpha, so if you have a transparent background when you're doing animations, it will allow that to be output. The color depth, keep at 8 unless you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, go to 16, but your colors will be all over the place if you don't know what you're doing, in my opinion. So I don't know what I'm doing, and if I put that at 16, it makes a big difference. Compression, you can do a 0 lossless compression, and when you do this just means that the file size is going to be freaking massive, but it's going to have really high quality. But honestly, at 2D, I mean, how much do you need? Just render higher resolution, in my opinion. I'm not an expert at this, but don't kill your PC for no reason. Okay, moving on. Right here we have the view layers property. Honestly, I've never even opened this tab ever in my life, so I would say that you're kind of good on that, so you can look into it, read into it later, but we're not going to use it for this video. This is a scene setup. We're not going to use it either, so keep it easy. The world properties we will use, which we can change the background of the world to different colors. So if we kind of look around, now it has that color, so we don't have to do like a backdrop. Blender has this weird problem with Grease Pencil when it renders a drawn background on top of a static an object. When you do that, it messes up completely the rendering. I'm not too sure why it does that. So yeah, like if you draw a background in Blender Grease Pencil and then draw another stroke on top of it, there's sometimes rendering issues. So I'm not too sure why that happens. So I think you're gonna have to do something in the composite thing, but that's a different thing. So moving on, collection we don't ever deal with. We won't deal with it here. Object properties, if we come into object mode, select the object, and I can show you live what it does. We hit G and it shows you the XYZ location, or we can do the XYZ and S to scale, and we can move that around. Now something that I will add really quickly with the object properties, you can hit this right here and just about any property in Blender, and it'll add a keyframe in that location for you. So if you're animating these things, it's super useful to know and super useful to have. So all these other things we will not deal with, and we will move forward. Going in, we have the modifiers tab. We won't do this in this tab, but I have countless videos on Grease Pencil modifiers, so please check them out. They are loaded with information on each individual modifier, and any modifier that's on there that you do not see, let me know and I can cover it. So yeah, so once again, we'll not do this for this video, but basically you add a modifier to a stroke, and then it messes with it in some way. So the noise modifier is pretty popular. So look, as I add the noise modifier, it just does it naturally. It's just like a special effect almost, without being a special effect, and you can dynamically change a lot of these values to influence the stroke without actually having to influence the stroke directly. Moving on, we have the effect right here, and I have videos on effects similar to modifiers. They do the same thing, they're just called something different. So we have the pixelate effect, which would just make it more pixely. We can't really see it, so we're going to have to make it bigger. Let me see here. So cool right here, makes it look pixely, and there's countless other effects. So moving on, oh, let me just kind of go over I'll go over that in a second, hold on. So moving on, we have the stroke. We're never going to use this. These are physics. We're not going to get into physics. And object constraints. That is another one. Holy moly, I needed this for another video. Okay, anyways, object constraints just allow you to limit rotation, location, scale. It's just making things more difficult for your, making things more predictable, I should say, for the objects in your scene. Layers panel, we will go over. We can just, if you ever worked in Photoshop or any photo editing software, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to add a new layer, we'll hit this add right here, and we'll call this new layer. And with that new layer selected, we'll come over here to draw. We'll draw in the new layer, and just to show that they're all not the same, we will hide the other. And now just a new layer is shown. I have a video not on layers but on masking, and you should check it out as well. So it kind of goes in deep about all of that. So moving forward, this is the material pane. Material pane is very straightforward. What we would want to do if we want to add a material, we'll hit the plus button right here, we'll hit new material, and then there's a stroke. You have two options, which is going to be the stroke. So we can have like I don't know, a blue stroke. So now when we draw, it's a blue stroke, and because it is assigned, these points are assigned to materials, we can dynamically update them, and this is why it's so powerful. Now if we also want to add a fill to this material, we would select fill, and now that stroke also has a fill that accompanies it. If you want to change the material value on a stroke or any kind of object, what you want to do is go into edit mode, select the points that you want. In this case, we'll select the material that we want, and we hit assign. And now it has now updated, and just for fun, I'll show you the power of it. We'll select this one right here, select this black, and then we'll hit assign, and now we have changed the materials. So moving forward, we have texture property. This is for texture brushes. If you know anything about texture brushes, what you can do is come in here, create a new texture, come down here to noise, and then we can actually paint with this brush. Anyways, we won't go into that in this video. Okay, cool. So another thing that you should get really familiar with is the timeline area, and the timeline area is right here, this pane right here. And basically what you're going to see, to move around, you'll do well, to play, we'll push space, and the space will allow us to play through the timeline. And now that we are playing through the timeline, the other thing that we can do is we can drag across the keyframes. We can use the arrow keys to go between keyframes. We can also, or between each frame. Okay, and there's different types. If we come over here to this drop down, we can actually go, right now we're in the grease pencil, and all that means is that when we draw something, it updates in the grease pencil, so we can actually see it right here. Now there's another type of timeline, and which is going to be the dope sheet, and the dope sheet, it just goes off the object information where it's at in space. So right here the object information is over here, so we can do G, and then if we have this right here, this is auto record, so it'll automatically save your keyframes, and we move it, and you can see that we have a new one created. To kind of illustrate that these are two different ones, we come in here into grease pencil, and if we move this, there's no keyframe that gets created, but when we come back into the dope sheet, there's a new one that was created. So this is important because you need to understand the difference between puppeteering, moving objects around, and also just frame by frame animation. Frame by frame animation is going to stay in the grease pencil, and it's just like you're drawing on the frame and changing the object itself's principles. However, if you come over here to the dope sheet, we are just moving things around, scaling things up, rotating, and overall the object, the grease pencil stroke, will remain the same as long as you don't actually edit it. So with that being said, if you are in the dope sheet editor, you can do up and down to jump between keyframes, and left and right on the arrows to go back and forth. So that makes it really useful and quickly to edit it. We have shape key editor. We're not going to get into that in this video. Mask, we're not going to get into it. Action editor, we will not get into either. And then we can actually come in here. This, we might touch on this. Actually, we will touch on this in the series. But if we come down to this drop down, by default, we're in the dope sheet. We can come into the timeline, which is similar but not the same. It's a little different, but overall, just stay in the dope sheet. But what we'll stay in is the dope sheet right here, and then we will also do the graph editor. And the graph editor just shows different values on a curve. This is very important for when we're trying to be really precise with our movements. And when I say precise, I mean have a kind of bounce in, bounce out elastic effect, or it saves time for us so that we don't have to add extra keyframes, but rather we can just mess with these curves and change the value along this so that it kind of has a cool breathing like effect and a smoother effect or a harsher effect. So we'll get into that later, but just want you to be kind of more comfortable and aware of this as well. Over here we're going to have the collections, the outliner, that's what they call it, and it just shows us the collections, all the objects in space that we have. The camera, if you remember, you use a middle mouse button to go into space. If you push period, it'll zoom in on whatever object you want to see in 3D space, and as you can see, this is the camera. We can select the stroke, hit the period, and now we will be right there over the stroke. And yeah, so that about covers it for everything that you really need to know to get started with Blender. So I hope that was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, but this is a 00 series. So the next video, we're going to go from using all this information that we just learned to creating a full animation that you can add on your portfolio that is beginner friendly and beginner level. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video, and see ya.